Hello and welcome to Bluepilling. I am Devest the A10. Today I wanted to talk about gun laws in Europe and the United States and how America could solve its gun violence epidemic. Let's not waste any time. So in the English-speaking world there is a false dichotomy presented with how gun ownership works between the highly restrictive weapon laws of the United Kingdom and the violence epidemic of the United States from poorly regulated weapons. In reality, the European Union by and large doesn't have weapon laws that resemble either of the failed systems used in the major English-speaking countries. They present a superior third way for gun ownership, where firearms are readily accessible and violence isn't comparable to Africa simply by using common sense. In Germany specifically, the laws are a lot better for legal gun owners. Background checks are performed instantaneously so you don't have to wait to buy a gun. There are no feature bans on firearms, so select fire and fully automatic firearms are cheap and legal. For the same cost as a semi-automatic only 16-inch barrel Cuck musket, a German can get a select fire assault rifle. German guns are also generally higher quality because gun companies have to compete with each other due to European antitrust laws. Whereas American gun companies are all part of a business cartel that uses their monopoly to artificially inflate the cost of firearms to increase their profit margins. At the same time, per capita, there are about 10 times as many violent crimes in America and over 9 times as many murders, when compared to Germany. The reason for this is because Germany filters out criminals with a licensing and insurance system for firearms ownership. The licensing application process filters out criminals while the insurance system stops the flow of legally purchased firearms into resale to criminals. In Germany, you can't sell your guns to a criminal and then give yourself legal cover by claiming they were stolen, since your insurance company will jack your rates up if you do. This also undercuts the narrative about gun laws doing nothing to foil criminals. The few shootings that do occur in Germany are because the police didn't intervene to disarm someone who was clearly violent. The solution is for the laws in place to actually be enforced. No German across the political spectrum is saying we need to restrict features or ban guns wholesale. I also hear a lot of shit about how German police can harass gun owners and invade their privacy because we don't have the Second Amendment. Citing when FPS Germany had state and federal law enforcement perform a warrantless search of his property, found his weed stash, confiscated $500,000 of guns and had him thrown in jail because they saw a package in his mailbox and he answered the door wearing shorts. Wait, actually, that was FPS Russia, who despite the name lives in Livonia, Georgia. The reason the American gun system is so bad is because it is dominated by the interest of criminals. American gun companies can maximize profits by creating a system where their guns pour out into the hands of criminals. Not only in the United States, but also most of the weapons used by criminals south of the border are pouring in from the U.S. A smaller scale example of this is the situation in Chicago, where Indiana-based gun stores make their money by selling to straw buyers who resell guns to gangs in Illinois. Or the fact that background checks can't be kept digitally, so that they're slow to conduct with a backlog in conjunction with laws that allow guns to be sold after 72 hours if the background check hasn't been completed. This is why European companies don't want to sell guns to American civilians, because everyone in the business world knows that they are selling guns to drug cartels who then smuggle drugs into Europe to pay for the guns. If a German sells guns to a Gulf state, then they'll typically use them for killing Iranian proxies, and they pay for them by selling oil and natural gas to Europe. So it ends up being a mutually beneficial relationship. But at the end of the day, Americans probably couldn't actually adopt German-style gun laws and achieve lower levels of violence. They would probably need to adopt British-style gun laws to bring it down. This isn't because of people of color. According to the people who ramble about multiculturalism, Germany is dominated by refugees now, so if gun laws don't work, then we should see an epidemic of violence from people of color using illegal firearms. The real problem is that British culture created and sustained this problem in the first place. British people are so violent that they have to regulate newspapers and shoelaces in the United Kingdom because they will use them as weapons. As I am writing this, the Brits are trying to burn down hotels with brown people in them, and half of the white population supports these actions. Like the human equivalent of the AIDS virus, people of British ancestry are present all throughout the United States. which makes it politically impossible for America to become less violent without some sort of revolution occurring. I do have a solution for the British problem. Basically, as an intermediary step towards German model gun laws in America, you introduce universal military service for the National Guard. But as part of this universal service, guardsmen are trained and can keep their weapons and equipment with them where they are responsible for it, instead of at an armory. Similar to the way chemotherapy works by killing cancer cells before the host, thanks to the violent nature of Brits, they would use the opportunity to murder themselves or their family members in a nationwide epidemic of household-sized civil wars, steadily increasing the ratio of rational people in America until they would claim a supermajority and push through German-style gun laws. We can already see a similar mechanism in action, where Republicans end up killing each other off with gun violence and COVID when they make contact with one another. At the same time, a universal service would also keep Brits in check to stop them from starting another insurrection. Since British people can't win a fight, they generally rely on their targets being completely unprotected, while universal service would give everyone the same training and equipment. Now let's wrap this up with a segment on some obscure facts that elude the gun violence lobby's rhetoric. In addition to being overlooked by the American anti-gun crowd, guns are definitely a major cause of murder and suicide in the wrong hands, because guns are an incredibly easy way to kill someone compared to other methods. If making an IED or throwing battery acid on someone was as easy as shooting them like these people claim, then Second Amendmentards have defeated the premise of gun laws giving criminals the advantage, since law-abiding citizens could just defend themselves with battery acid. Another thought-terminating cliché bound to come up when talking about Germany is the narrative the Holocaust only happened after the Jews were disarmed. In reality, the Nazis are a good example of why armed citizens wouldn't be able to stop a totalitarian government. German Jews were incredibly well-armed and trained when the Holocaust occurred. The reason why Germans have such a strong gun culture was because of the militaristic culture of the Germans. Every male was a soldier or militiaman up until the end of the Cold War. This system reached its height during the Weimar era because of the restrictions imposed on the army's size and their lack of authority to operate. German militias, including Jews, encompassed almost the entire population. They would have privately owned armored cars, machine guns, grenades, and artillery pieces. But German Jews were still eradicated, with the results of their fight being so lopsided that any resistance Jews mustered was completely forgotten. Because the majority of Germans passively and actively supported targeting 0.1% of their population, the disparity between German Jews and a 3%er is 100-to-1 in favor of the Jews. And the modern security apparatus of the United States versus that of Nazi Germany is 100 times in favor of the United States, which is why the United States doesn't respect 3%ers as a threat to the state and instead treats them like the blowhards they are. There's also the narrative about Operation Fast and Furious. According to legend, the ATF was smuggling guns south of the border. You can dismiss this out of hand because the ATF are the good guys. They're basically real-life versions of the Call of Duty Modern Warfare protagonists, except they're protecting us from real threats, where our Arab and Russian enemies are dealt with by other Arabs and Russians who are sick of their shit. What actually happened was that the ATF started studying the flow of American guns to smugglers and cartels south of the border. The controversy around Fast and Furious was that the ATF violated the Dickey Amendment by collecting data that made American gun laws look bad, by pointing out how there were loopholes that made it easier to arm criminals. This is an obscure law that prevents publicly funded organizations from researching gun violence. This narrative about the ATF giving guns to smugglers was invented to direct attention from the real legal battle, finally discussing the Second Amendment itself. This doesn't really matter, because the only amendment afforded in the Bill of Rights that isn't routinely violated is the Third Amendment. Beyond that, the Second Amendment also doesn't provide any legal protection for committing treason or insurrection. Like there was nothing in the Constitution preventing a federal agent from killing that idiot that was shooting at Trump with his legally owned cuck musket, even though you could argue in court he was fighting against tyranny. Anyways, thanks for listening. If you disagree with anything I say, you better make sure to drop a comment before you become a gun violence statistic in America. Until next time, this is Divest the A10 signing out.